disillusionment.
I am born in your first baby boom year, 1946. I know all about that.
Okay. We came not too long after, 3 years after.
I remember that change. It was 1964.
Yeah.
So you know, and everything was changing so quickly then, that even a year apart, or 3 years apart, 4 years apart, there were so many, there were such changes. I think Michael's out there looking for what room it is, so.
I went in college one way, and 4 years later, I came out completely different.
Welcome, you come to the right place.
I guess I was a late bloomer. A late boomer.
A late
My
boomer.
Yeah.
So, Born in Berkeley is really about a girl who's born in Berkeley, later moves to Menlo Park, as I did, and then as her parents there's pending divorce and some turmoil, which propels her to go on the road, eventually with the likes of people like Ken Kesey and Neil Cassidy, which in my take on the drug scene, is pretty conservative. Because to me it was the sort of tainting of the civil rights and the peace and the idealism. The magical time was before that. In fact, I even think some of it was inserted to stop some of the positive social movements. And so Born in Berkeley is the first of the series, and then I followed that with The Rainbow's Daughter, and this deals with the end of the 60s. The Rainbow's Daughter is the 70s, and it tracks a real group in San Jose that existed that was called the Family of Man in reality, but in the book it's the Circle of Light. So it's a docu-novel about a spiritual search group. There were so many then, from the Moonies to the quote Jesus freaks to Hare Krishna. There are many. They were prevalent, and I think it was a phase after the political activism. So The Rainbow's Daughter deals with a young woman's 7-year exposure to a San Jose group that really existed, and we've heard about Jim Jones and we've heard about other uplifting leaders. This was sort of a Camelot-like experience that had some cult-like elements, and it was took place in the 70s. So it was interesting because, as Dave will speak about later, come on in. As Dave will share more about this book, that she was a very unusual leader. She was a blue-collar gal, a young mother, who had sort of been bypassed the 60s experiences that so many who were raising children, but she was quite a fascinating character that you might love to hate or you might love. So, and then this book, Where the Flowers Have Gone, sort of takes that 60s counterculture theme and goes forward when people meet in the 80s, have an ill-fated love affair in which they return to her teenage and his college years. I gave her a drug-induced memory gap, and there's some drama here. It's about 51% fiction. You'd have to guess what parts really happened, but it explores some of the, again, that period, that sort of beat hippie transition period before the drugs, the idealism, the poetry, the passing of the Beat generation, passing a cup, and then it goes forward and the outgrowth into the 80s, which was a very materialistic time for this to take place. So, and then I wrote, I sort of think of my books as quartets. The first 4 are a quartet. The 4th of it is Shadow Over the Beach. And this one, set more in the later 80s to the beginning of the 90s, the character continues the, come on in, the spiritual search theme, and she's gone from Born in Berkeley, that period of peace movement, anti-Vietnam Day committee involvement as I had, the civil rights, raising money for SNCC at age 15 for voter registration, to the spiritual search in San Jose, led by a charismatic woman leader, to the love affair in the 80s that revisits that 60s period, and now picking up the spiritual theme a bit more, her graduate study, transpersonal studies, are like mine, where the transpersonal plays somewhat connected to Edgar Cayce's work. And I had a mentor, a woman mentor, who had been close to that work, but was never really acknowledged, the scope of it. So this one sort of takes place at, and these are decades of our lives. And you mentioned being born just a little bit earlier, living through that period. How many people identify as a baby boomer, born baby boomer? And so, you're a little before.
1 year before.
Chris is 1 year after. But there were so many dramatic changes. And then I wrote a couple of books that dealt with gender identity issues before it was popular. I had a cross-dressing friend who was very close to, and who sort of led me to view alternative communities in Revenge of the Goddess and Parting the Veil. And then The Quest for Soulmates at Midlife is part of a quartet yet to be finished. A Burst of Sunrise, Side Roads, which Gary Singh profiled a lot. It was sort of a character who can't be with a person she thinks is her soulmate. There are barriers, but still contact. And so she determines to kind of go on the road, but locally, through the San Jose milieu, wandering the nights through Japantown, and kind of in a post-beat venue, traveling the side roads. Swan again, continue with that soulmate exploration and its denouement. And finally, now, the Last Piano Bar, which is really progressing through decades and looking at people now as our lifespan is about to dramatically expand. Stanford says, I teach active older adults and others to write novels, and Stanford suggests that babies born tonight will probably live between 100 and 120. So how are we going to get there? And there are people, some of whom in those rotating slides, in their 90s, who are, through music and through having a perspective about what life is really about, the poignant life journey, love, passion, etc., vital in their 90s. And singing and dancing, as one woman who's in one of the slides was out dancing with her almost 20 years younger boyfriend. She always went clubbing till 2, happened to slip, fell, had a little hip surgery and was okay, but started to see friends who had crossed over and made a gentle transition from this world at 98 because she was still alive, not marginalized in any way. And so, anyway, so I'm exploring, I think the beginning of, with Born in Berkeley, I'm sort of exploring isms. That may not stay, it's a big thing. The isms. The isms being racism, and later exploring sexism. I have 2 children, one gifted, one autistic, so I've been looking at the rights of people who are disabled, animal rights. But now, for me, it's looking at ageism, and that's what a lot of baby boomers, who were sort of mavericks before, we're going to take a different look at what it's like to age and to mature. And sort of a more creative look. So I hope the Last Piano Bar, which could be entertaining and continue some of the drama of the protagonist character, could be a source of insight. So Dave, I'm just going to have you talk and kind of go back and forth. Do you want to stand up here?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Dave Hickey. I think can you all hear me?
Yep.
Oh.
Dave has been active at times on KKP radio, and he's written a number of the introductions that are now part of this book, and has a real sense of this author, his own perspective.
Yeah, I got acquainted with Lynn for the very first time when I listened to Eric Mystic's interview on KQP on a Friday afternoon. I took off work early and I was driving around Santa Clara, where I lived at the time, and he was interviewing this local author who had written something like 5 or 6 novels at that time. This was 2006. This is really amazing that someone is functioning in San Jose, which is not a place that's really noted for its literary fecundity necessarily, or famous writers here. There have been some. But she was doing it with all kinds of grit, and the subject matter I found really interesting. And she talked about The Rainbow's Daughter, and she talked about Born in Berkeley primarily. These other books hadn't been published yet. And then I went to an event that same weekend, coincidentally, in the Camel Community Center, and I was getting in a line for food, and Lynn was behind me talking about The Rainbow's Daughter. I turned around and said, I just heard it yesterday on the radio. And it really sounds interesting, and I just went to Willow Glen. They had a bookstore back then. They don't, it's closed now, like so many have. And I found, because you were promoting your book being sold at that place, and on Lincoln Avenue. So I bought The Rainbow's Daughter. I think that was the one I was starting to read. I said, it's a fantastic book. And I have very, very high tone tastes. I like high literature. I have a master's degree in English. I like some pulp writing, but I like high literature. So I really felt that this was someone that should be promoted and appreciated, and I hadn't finished it at that time. I subsequently still think that this book is the one everyone should read. This book is fantastic. It really is. I've read most of the others. There's some here that you haven't got here. You didn't talk about this one.
Oh, Valley Vashta is my mystery set amongst the
Yeah.
homeless. I'm quite proud of that.
Yeah, and I know you always have been. But this book is really extraordinary, and when I took a different take on the book than she did a little bit. I think I still do. I find the book absolutely terrifying. I don't find it, illuminating, interesting. It's really a scary book about a cult that requires Stockholm syndrome. It's the main character, Daisy, is like Madame Bovary or Captain Ahab. It's someone you absolutely don't forget. The perpetrations, it's Jonestown for me. And it's right here in Santa Clara, where I grew up. And so it has all these local associations. And the other thing that's really neat about this book, and she doesn't do it anymore, what she did is she has these wonderful illustrations, like a Victorian novel, and they really add substance and weight to the book. So this is really an exceptional work, as is this one. And if I took the analogy of John Steinbeck, a local author, somewhat famous, this is her Mice of Men, this is her East of Eden, these two books. This book is, thank you. This book is got some publishing peccadillos in it, nothing to, reflecting on the author. But this book is really clean, and it's very short, and it's very, very vivid for the time. I too lived through the time that she's speaking of. Not quite as adventurously as she did, but I had strong opinions about being in the 60s. And what really interests me about the way Lynn writes is that she has great objectivity, particularly in these early books, where the 60s comes through her. It's like a movie. So you see these people really as they are. So she has a wonderful scene down in Mexico where she actually encounters Neil Cassidy, and I think, who's the other, Ken Kesey?
Ken Kesey.
Been a while since I read it. And you see these people as very mortal, very frail individuals. You don't see them as icons. And she was meeting them, one human being to another. And the whole book has that kind of atmosphere of someone who is just walking like their camera viewing this. It's not a Rolling Stone celebration of the 60s. So for that, I still think this book is really exceptional. These two are my real favorites, and I warmly endorse them. She talked about Where the Flowers Have Gone. This starts a whole trend with an involvement with an individual is very interesting. His name is Aidan Rose, and he's a local character, and he and Lynn get into quite a few misadventures through the course of these books. And I describe him as kind of a Yosemite Sam figure. He's always walking out on the edge of a limb, and then he's sawing himself off the limb, and somehow bouncing back. So is he still living? The basic?
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Also, the character Daisy is still alive too, right?
Yes.
And I just to double back on this. I had the thrill of meeting her, and I never thought I would meet someone so iconic and magnificent that I read about as fiction, the person in real life. And Lynn gave her a lot of help, but that was very enjoyable to have that opportunity.
You can just play something.
And Lynn didn't talk, what she didn't mention about these two books, these two go together, right?
They do.
And this is a scholarly work based on her time at the, was it the American University?
Atlantic University doing work on women's spirituality.
Yeah, the Edgar Cayce University, which is an accredited college back in Virginia Beach. And you got a full degree there,
I
right?
did.
And this was your treatise or your
It was my thesis adapted slightly to become a book.
Right. And it's very interesting because the Cayce sect, I should say, is very patriarchal, right?
It had real strong elements of that, which I addressed in this.
Right, and she had a theory that there was suppressed matriarchy in it, and that was what she was seeking to find out. So she wrote this novel, which reminds me a lot of the Da Vinci Code, in that she's uncovering the secrets that are, this is also a favorite of hers. One of her novels is one of my favorites.
You should read aloud some of your comments on the back covers. They're really interesting.
I guess I might as well make it easy. In a way similar to the Da Vinci Code, Shadow of the Beach offers suspense and discovery of many layers of previously unrevealed mysteries. Slowly revealing the secrets of an esoteric society makes for interesting and entertaining reading. So, and I think I also wrote the introduction to this one, didn't I?
You did.
This is one of the first ones I did. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. This is a really clean, for publication standards, a really clean book too. And really very enjoyable, so it's also. And this is quite a valuable work because it does have new scholarship as a part of it. Right?
New leaves. It's a work on women's spirituality that seeks to look at whether the re-emerging goddess tradition, which about the concept that for about 50,000 years, Earth's people often thought of the deity generally in more feminine terms. Men's role in birth wasn't understood. Women's were thought to be like the deity who had given birth to the stars and the universe. And there was a gender polar axis shift that I discovered. I made some academic leaps in that course of study, and I sought to link it to see if there were connections to Cayce's work, which really represented a sort of a mystical side of Judeo-Christianity that had become transpersonal, to see if there were links. So it touches on early creation myths, cross-racial, the concept of soulmates, the re-emerging goddess tradition, some archetypes for our period of time, and I did interviews of female humans from 14 to 107 to assess sort of their sense of exclusion or participation in that work. It's a good reference work on women's spirituality from a spiritual perspective.
So, and then you don't have Revenge of the Goddess?
I was looking for it. It might be sold out. There are two. It's a dyad. Revenge of the Goddess and Parting the Veil go together.
Right, and Versus Sunrise goes with it too, doesn't it?
Versus Sunrise follows. This is
Yeah.
sort of a quartet, then two, and then a quartet to come.
Because that's the way I remember it. But so I don't have the first one here, but this is what I wrote in the back of the book, and I also wrote the introduction to this one. I also, if I can boast a little bit more, I designed the cover of this book, and I'm very proud of it. I think it really looks sharp. And I was thinking of pulp novels from the 1950s.
You chose that, yes.
So anyway, what I wrote was Parting the Veil is a song of farewells, as Revenge of the Goddess, her previous book in the same theme, is about possibilities and comedic extremes. Parting the Veil shows that from the edge of sensual excess there is a clear path to a holy and upward calling. It's a sadder, darker continuation of the impact of the goddess as Rogers interprets her, so long ignored and forgotten in our culture. I actually prefer this novel of the two for its deeper poignancies. The two novels bring the S&M of sadomasochism and transgender communities into the orb of the Caroline Ryder saga. The whole series is a sentimental education of a woman from the 1960s through the new century. And I think it was around 2001 or sometime during that period.
Probably so. It was looking at, as I looked at the re-emerging goddess tradition and I started to look at the concept of ageism. Women tended, in the old movies that I love, women and many other parts of culture, there was a real marginalizing of women as they matured, maybe a fear of their, power and lifelong beauty, but one of the ways to break through for me was meeting people who had been in alternate communities, like, alternate gender orientation communities, power dynamic play, and to see that women there were playing interesting roles. They were dressed in attractive ways and playing interesting roles. So I was looking for ways, and I had a friend who subsequently passed away of leukemia who was an artist, and he, and at least a cross-dresser, maybe somewhat transgender, and he was very drawn to the ancient archetype of the goddess. So it was an exploration through also San Jose places and events. Some of these books are steamier than others, and there's the fellow the historian, his name is escaping me, the famous historian who passed away, Clyde Arbuckle, started attending my creative writing class, and he said, I want you to write the seamy side of San Jose with me, and he passed away. But in the shadows can be found a lot of light, and so the issues I tend to be interested in issues sort of ahead of the common acceptance of them, so it means taking risks and people, shaking their head at you. Gary Singh of Metro has written glowing reviews of my work that had to do with counterculture, youth, and so forth. When I took him out to Alviso, and I was so fascinated by these older people, not only singing the American songbook songs, but completely alive, completely powerful and elegant. It wasn't of as much interest. It's a world that I now want to explore. I think that we're really going to change the way we think about aging. I'll come back to progression, but I think people actually graduate. They can graduate to a new level of awareness that isn't just that we need to know about. So go ahead.
No, that's fine. It's illuminating.
Yeah.
I also want to add, I just thought of this. The heroine or the protagonist of this novel, Daisy
Forrest in that.
Daisy Forrest,
Yeah.
right. Daisy Forrest returns in this book as daylight razor truth. So you see her a little bit older, and she's still full of life. Not quite as much as in this book, but it was a lot of fun for me, and it also has Lynn's wonderful illustrations. Not all of your books have them, but most of your books, I think, have your illustrations.
They do, and that's a weird thing for a novel. It's not weird to do illustrations, but then I started being interested in character, in people who would inspire characters for me. Come on in, welcome. So I started being interested in people who would inspire characters. So I have a couple characters in the last piano bar, a wizened country singer named Blackie, who grew up on the cotton fields and then became a multimillionaire in real estate in Sunnyvale, and David Domino, who's what I call him Little Danny Hammer in the book, whose uncle was he wants to write a book about his uncle as part of the San Jose Mafia. All these characters began college professors to show up at the last piano bar. So I asked people, there were people who were comfortable being models for the characters, and in another way it was sort of commemorating the real life of that place. And it's stuck on that slide, so that's the one we're seeing. They wanted to rotate them. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. This was pretty good.
Yeah, let me give you a card and stuff and stay in touch with you.
This might be a good time just to take a brief break.
Let's do
Help
so.
yourself to the cookies and whatever you want to. I also want to mention that this is the last in the series we have about writings about San Jose called San Jose in Fact and Fiction Tape 2. Most of what we've had have been nonfiction, but this one is a work in fiction, but it's pretty much rooted in history. What Lynn has not said is that this is based in an Alviso institution called VALS.
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 Yeah.
VALS.
Get her
And
comment.
if you've heard anything, VALS is, if you go onto Yelp, it's either a 1 or a 5, according to rating. It's been
Get
here
her
for
comments.
ages. I'm sure Lynn will tell us a little bit more about that. But it's something that San Jose long-timers all know about.
Well, we met through our experience at the Alviso Library, which is actually a wonderful library in Alviso, a town that time forgotten. We'll talk a little bit more about that after a short break. So, did anyone want to get refreshments and stretch for a minute, and then we'll be right back, okay?